Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The morning was like any other. The sun crept through the curtains in our bedroom, casting long beams of light across the room as I buttoned my shirt. I could hear Kate in the bathroom, the soft hum of her voice as she moved through her own routine. It was all so normal, so ordinary. And yet, nothing felt right. Something about the way she had been acting lately gnawed at me. There was no single moment, no one thing I could point to and say, that's it. It was a collection of little things, subtle shifts in the way she carried herself, the words she didn't say, the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was. I was paying attention to everything. I poured my coffee, the sound of the liquid hitting the cup unnervingly loud in the silent kitchen. Kate walked in, smiling faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. That used to be her thing, her smile, radiant, full of warmth, lighting up every room. Now, it felt like a mask, a performance. You working late tonight? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Yeah, probably, she answered without looking up from her phone. Always the damn phone. The constant texts, the emails at all hours. I couldn't even remember the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics or schedules. Big project? I forced myself to sip my coffee, pretending everything was fine. You know how it is. Deadline's next week. She finally glanced up at me, the smile back in place, as if that would make me stop asking questions. I'll probably grab something to eat with the team after. Sure. My voice came out too clipped, too sharp. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but she didn't care. I watched her walk out of the kitchen, her heels clicking softly against the floor, and a familiar tightness settled in my chest. The kind that came from not knowing, from suspecting something terrible but having no proof. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to push harder, to confront her, to do something. But I didn't. Not yet. On the drive to work, the unease followed me like a shadow. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I should have, the radio turned down low so my mind could chew on the scraps of suspicion. She'd been working late a lot lately, too often. I replayed every small, seemingly insignificant detail in my head. The nights she came home with a faint, unfamiliar perfume clinging to her skin, the way she kept her phone face down on the table during dinner, the hollow way she laughed when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the stress at work really was getting to her. But it didn't feel like stress. It felt like distance. Something was slipping between us, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring blankly out the windshield. The thought hit me then, sharp and cold. What if there was someone else? The idea slid into my mind so effortlessly, as if it had been waiting there all along, lurking in the corners. I tried to push it away, but it stuck, burrowing deep. At work, I moved through the day on autopilot. Meetings, emails, small talk. All the while, my mind kept drifting back to Kate, to the way she'd smiled at me this morning. A practice smile, rehearsed, like she was performing a role she no longer cared about. I couldn't focus. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I found myself checking my phone more often than usual, glancing at the clock, wondering where she was, what she was doing, who she was doing it with. It was irrational, I told myself. I had no proof. And yet the more I thought about it, the more that gnawing sense of betrayal grew. Every time she didn't respond to a text right away, every time she came home later than expected, the doubt twisted tighter around my throat. By the time I got home that evening, I was on edge. Kate wasn't back yet. Working late again, she'd texted earlier. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen, wanting to reply, wanting to say something, anything that would make this feeling go away. But I didn't. I just waited. The house felt empty without her, cold. I sat on the couch, the TV on in the background, though I wasn't really watching it. My mind was elsewhere, replaying every little thing I'd noticed in the last few weeks. the late nights, the extra effort she put into her appearance. The secretive way she'd glance at her phone and quickly swipe it off when I entered the room. It was all there, laid out in front of me. But still, I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Not fully. When Kate finally came home, it was past midnight. She slipped in quietly, like she didn't want to wake me, but I was wide awake. I heard the click of her heels as she crossed the floor, the faint rustle of her coat as she hung it up. She didn't come to bed right away. Instead, I heard her go into the bathroom, the soft click of the door shutting behind her. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every sound amplified in the silence. After a few minutes, she slipped into bed beside me, her body warm but distant. She didn't say anything, neither did I. We just lay there in the dark, the space between us feeling like miles. I listened to her breathing, waiting for sleep to take her, but I couldn't close my eyes. The next morning, the same routine. Coffee, small talk, the faint tension that hummed between us, unspoken but ever present. Kate was distracted, checking her phone again as I asked her about her plans for the day. Another late night at work, another excuse. I nodded, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside, the knot of suspicion tightened. After she left, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was being ridiculous, but the doubt wouldn't let go. I needed to know. I had to know. I started paying closer attention, every little detail. The way she brushed off my questions, the sudden burst of energy she seemed to have after work. The new perfume I couldn't place. Late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her in the next room, laughing at something on her phone. The sound of it twisted something inside me. Who was she texting? What was she hiding? One night, I stayed up later than usual, waiting for her to come home. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I heard the door quietly open. She slipped inside, tiptoeing like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I pretended to be asleep as she slid into bed beside me, her body warm but distant. My heart raced in the dark, each beat echoing the questions that churned in my mind. Where had she been? And more importantly, who had she been with? I tried to shake it off, but every day the signs were harder to ignore. The late-night texts, the excuses, the distant look in her eyes like she was here, but not really here. Every time I tried to talk to her, she brushed me off with a smile that no longer felt real. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing. The doubt. I wasn't the type to let things fester. I was the kind of man who needed answers, and I was going to get them, no matter what it took. The tension between us continued to build, an invisible wall growing higher and higher with each passing day. I watched her closely, looking for clues, signs that would confirm my suspicions. There were moments when I almost confronted her, when the words were right there on the tip of my tongue. But something always stopped me, a voice in the back of my mind, whispering that I needed more. Proof. Something undeniable. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed empty. Kate was in the living room again, her phone glowing in the dark as she typed furiously. I watched her from the hallway, my stomach churning. She didn't see me. She didn't know I was standing there, silently witnessing the cracks in our life growing deeper. I turned and went back to bed, my mind made up. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to know the truth. And once I had it, once I knew without a doubt what she was hiding, I would make her and whoever she was with pay for it. For now, though, I waited. The tension simmered beneath the surface, coiling tighter and tighter, ready to snap. But I wouldn't let it. Not yet. I would play the part, smile when necessary, pretend I didn't notice, until I had the proof, until I was ready to strike. This unease, this sense of something slipping out of my control, it wouldn't last. I wouldn't let it. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, like a storm brewing just over the horizon. And when it hit, I'd be ready. The small suspicions piled up. They started out as whispers, faint doubts I could brush off. But as the days passed, those whispers grew louder, persistent. Each new piece of the puzzle, no matter how small, fed the gnawing ache inside me. I couldn't focus on anything else anymore. Kate's late nights, the way she smiled absently when I asked about her day, the secrecy that hung between us like a thick fog, none of it made sense on its own. But together? Together it painted a picture, one I wasn't ready to see. I started paying closer attention to everything. Her routines, her excuses. At first, it was just glancing over her shoulder when she was texting, noting how her thumb would slide quickly to hide whatever she was typing if I got too close. She never left her phone unattended anymore. It was always on her, glued to her hand or tucked into her bag. When she thought I wasn't watching, I saw her smile at something on the screen, a kind of secret satisfaction that sent my heart pounding. But then I started digging deeper. I told myself it was necessary, that I needed to know the truth before confronting her. After all, suspicion wasn't enough to destroy a marriage. Proof was. Real, undeniable proof. So I started tracking her every move. I installed a discreet tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower one morning, my hands shaking as I worked quickly. My stomach twisted as I did it, disgust gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, but it was the only way. I needed to know. The second the app was in place, I felt a sick kind of relief. I was in control again. The first night I tracked her, she was supposedly out for a late meeting. She'd said it with that same empty smile, the one that never touched her eyes anymore. The app pinged her location, across town, nowhere near her office. I drove there, my knuckles white against the steering wheel as I stared at the blinking dot on the map, watching it move. It led me to a bar, dimly lit and upscale. I parked across the street and waited. It wasn't long before I saw her. She walked out, laughing, arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize. Not one of her coworkers, not someone I'd met at one of her firm's events. He was tall, slick, his hand resting casually on her lower back like it had always belonged there. My blood ran cold. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb, watching them disappear into the night. A part of me wanted to follow, to rip him apart with my bare hands, but I forced myself to stay still. Rage wouldn't get me anywhere. It wouldn't give me the satisfaction I needed. I needed to know everything first. I needed to understand how deep this went before I made my move. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. I made coffee while Kate bustled around the kitchen, talking about some meaningless meeting at work. She didn't know I knew. She didn't know I'd watched her with him. The lie sat between us, heavy and suffocating, but I kept my face neutral, even smiling when she kissed me goodbye. The moment she left, I dove deeper. I started checking her social media profiles, looking for any hint, any crack in the facade she'd been building. Nothing stood out at first, but then I noticed something. She'd stopped posting about us. No more pictures of us at dinner, no more comments about how much she loved me or our life together. It was like I'd been slowly erased. The absence of me was louder than anything she could have said. I scrolled further, finding pictures of work functions, parties, her smiling that same hollow smile next to people I didn't know. I studied the faces in each photo, looking for him, the man from the bar. There was no sign of him anywhere. It was like he didn't exist. She was careful, I'll give her that, but not careful enough. I drove past her office after hours, parked a few blocks away, and waited. She wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. My phone buzzed, the app showing her location at another bar, this time closer to the city. I drove by slowly, my heart pounding in my chest as I caught a glimpse of her through the window. She was sitting with him again, her hand resting on his forearm, her body angled toward him like he was the center of her universe. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every time she smiled at me, every time she touched me, I wondered if she was thinking about him. I wondered if she compared us in her head, measured my worth against his, and found me lacking. I became obsessed. I started going through her things when she wasn't home. Her emails, her messages, anything I could find. I felt like a criminal in my own house, rifling through drawers and scanning her texts while pretending to work late. The more I found, the more my stomach churned. She was careful, deleting messages and emails, but not careful enough. She'd slip up every once in a while, leave a text chain that was a little too personal, a little too flirty, enough to confirm what I already knew. Her lies built up like bricks, one on top of the other, until they formed a wall so thick I couldn't see the woman I'd married anymore. Kate, my wife, the woman who had promised to love me forever, had been slipping away for months, and I'd been too blind to notice. One evening, she told me she was going to a work function again. Same excuse, different day. I checked the tracker after she left. It pinged her location at a hotel downtown. My heart stopped for a second, my vision blurring with a wave of nausea. A hotel. It wasn't even subtle anymore. I drove there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they ached. The closer I got, the slower I drove until I was parked across the street from the entrance, staring at the glowing windows. I waited. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud in the silence of the car. I knew what I was going to see. I'd prepared myself for it, but when the moment came, it still hit like a sledgehammer. They walked out together, arm in arm. Her hair was tousled, her smile wide and relaxed, like she didn't have a care in the world. He leaned in, whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, her hand sliding up to touch his cheek. It was intimate, casual, like they'd done it 100 times before. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just watched as they walked to his car, got in, and drove off. I sat there for what felt like hours, the reality of it crashing over me in waves. This was it, the proof I needed, the truth I had been dreading. She was with him. She had been with him for a long time. But even in that moment, as the cold rage settled deep inside me, I didn't lose control. I didn't rush after them. I didn't call her and scream down the phone. I just sat there, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, and let the reality of it sink in. This wasn't just some mistake. This wasn't a one-time thing. She had been lying to me for months, building a life with someone else while I was left in the dark. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself. It was in the way she had carried on as if nothing had changed, as if I wouldn't notice the distance between us growing wider and wider with each passing day. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring around me. The world outside felt distant, unreal, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted dream. But the cold knot in my stomach told me otherwise. This was real. This was happening. When I got home, I went through the motions. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and lay in bed beside her when she finally slipped in hours later. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask her where she'd been, didn't confront her with the truth I now knew. Instead, I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about the man she was with, about how easy it had been for him to slip into her life, into my life. I thought about how long this had been going on, how many nights she had come home to me with his scent still lingering on her skin. And as the minutes ticked by, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me confronting her in some cliché argument. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of tears or anger. No, this was going to end on my terms, in my way. I would make her regret every lie, every stolen moment, every touch that wasn't meant for me. She wasn't just going to lose him. She was going to lose everything. That night, as she lay sleeping beside me, her breathing steady and calm, I stayed awake, watching her in the dim light. Something inside me had shifted. The love I had for her, the life we'd built, it all felt distant now, like a dream I could barely remember. All that remained was the cold, calculated need for revenge. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I would make them both suffer, slowly, methodically, the way I had. I would take everything from them, piece by piece, until they were left with nothing but the ruins of their own betrayal. And when the time came, when they were at their lowest, I'd walk into his office and I'd make him tremble. In the days that followed, I became a shadow in my own life. Kate moved through our home as if nothing had changed, still smiling her rehearsed smiles, still lying about late nights at work. I mirrored her, pretending everything was fine, knowing with a strange, detached calm that she had no idea I'd seen her with Jason. She didn't know that I'd watched her walk out of that hotel with him, laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She didn't know that my rage was no longer burning hot and uncontrolled, but cold and deliberate, simmering just below the surface. I didn't confront her. I couldn't, not yet. Confrontation would be too easy, too simple. Yelling, crying, the inevitable apologies or denials that would make me feel better in the short term, but it wouldn't be enough. No, I wanted more than that. I wanted them to feel the way I did. I wanted the destruction to be slow, agonizing, and inevitable, something that would haunt them long after I'd walked away from the wreckage. I began with Jason. Kate might be the one betraying me, but Jason was the one who needed to pay first. I had to know more about him before I made my move. I wasn't going to charge in blind. So, while Kate left for work each morning, I spent my days digging into his life. I searched online databases, professional networking sites, anything that could give me a clearer picture of who Jason really was. It wasn't hard to find his work information. He was an executive at a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind of man who thrived on power and reputation. Perfect. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to know more. Personal details, vulnerabilities. It wasn't enough to hit him professionally. I needed to dismantle him piece by piece. I found whispers of impropriety. Nothing concrete, but enough to dig into further. Rumors of office affairs, colleagues who found him charming but arrogant, whispers of misconduct that had been swept under the rug by his higher-ups. It wasn't surprising. Men like Jason always had a few skeletons rattling around, hidden just below the surface. I started by planting a seed. Anonymous tips to his company's HR department, carefully worded complaints about his behavior. Nothing overtly damning, just enough to stir the pot. Enough to make them start looking more closely at his actions, at the way he conducted himself in the office. A few phone calls to clients, whispering doubts about his integrity, suggesting he might not be the man they thought he was. The kind of rumors that spread quickly, quietly, infecting everything they touched. It wasn't immediate, of course. This kind of destruction took time. But I was patient. I watched and waited, going about my daily life as if nothing was wrong. Kate would come home late, smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, and I'd smile at her, ask her how her day was, play the part of the oblivious husband. All the while, my mind was focused on Jason, on the small cracks I was creating in his perfect little life. A week after I started, I began to see the effects. Kate mentioned offhandedly one evening that Jason had been off at work, distracted and irritable. I just nodded, pretending to listen, my heart racing at the confirmation. The cracks were widening. He was starting to feel the pressure. But that was only the beginning. The real blow would come later, once I'd gathered enough dirt to ruin him completely. But then, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in Kate's home office one afternoon, rifling through her laptop while she was out. It had become a habit at this point, checking her emails, her messages, looking for anything that might give me more insight into her relationship with Jason. I'd already found enough to confirm the affair, but I wanted to know the full extent of it. How long had it been going on? What were their plans? Did they think they could build a life together on the ashes of my marriage? I found it buried in her drafts folder, an unsent email that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just a casual fling, it wasn't just sex. Kate was in love with him. The email was a long, rambling confession, telling Jason how she couldn't keep lying to me anymore, how she wanted to leave, how she saw a future with him. She was planning to tell me soon, to leave me for him. The world tilted on its axis. I'd expected betrayal, yes, but not this, not love. Not plans for a future together. I sat there for what felt like hours staring at the screen, reading and rereading the words. They didn't make sense. Kate wasn't in love with him. She couldn't be. She wasn't the type to throw everything away for a man like Jason, was she? But the words were there, staring back at me, undeniable. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the laptop at her when she walked through the door and demand answers. But I didn't. The anger burned hotter than before, but I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. This changed everything. If she was planning to leave me, I couldn't just focus on Jason anymore. I needed to dismantle the life she thought she was going to have with him. It wasn't just about ruining him now. I had to ruin her future too. I started formulating a new plan, one that would take both of them down. I wasn't just going to make Jason pay for what he'd done. I was going to make sure that Kate lost everything, that the future she thought she had with him was destroyed before it even began. They wouldn't just suffer, they would suffer together, blaming each other, watching their dreams crumble to dust. I kept digging. I found more emails, more messages, enough to paint a clear picture of their relationship. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. They'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. It was sickening, but it gave me what I needed. I could see exactly where to strike, where they were most vulnerable. The next phase of my plan required precision. I needed to push Jason just far enough that his life started to unravel, but not so far that he'd get fired too soon. If he lost his job now, he'd have nothing to lose, and that wasn't what I wanted. I needed him desperate, clinging to the last shreds of his reputation, still believing he could salvage his career, his relationship with Kate, everything. I needed him to spiral slowly. I set up a meeting with one of his company's major clients, using a burner phone to pose as a disgruntled employee. I fed them enough insider information to make them question Jason's competence, his ethics. It wasn't hard. They'd already heard whispers. I made sure they knew that if they continued working with him, their reputation could be at risk. They listened. A few days later, Jason lost a major account. It was the first real blow, and I could feel the ripple effect even from a distance. Kate mentioned it that night, saying he was stressed, that things at work weren't going well. I could see the worry in her eyes, the doubt starting to creep in. She didn't know, of course, that I was the one pulling the strings. She thought it was just bad luck, bad timing, but I wasn't done. The next step was to turn them against each other. I couldn't let their relationship strengthen under the pressure. I needed it to break. I started feeding Jason misinformation, posing as Kate in a series of carefully crafted messages. I made him doubt her, made him believe she was pulling away from him, that she was second-guessing their plans to leave me. At the same time, I planted seeds of doubt in Kate's mind, acting cold and distant at home, making her wonder if I knew something, if maybe she'd underestimated me. It worked faster than I expected. Jason began pulling back, unsure of Kate's commitment to their future. He was already stressed from the trouble at work, and the added strain of thinking she might be having second thoughts pushed him further. Kate, in turn, started to panic. She could sense the shift in him, and it terrified her. She became more desperate, clinging to him, trying to salvage what was left of their relationship. But the cracks were widening. Every day I watched them unravel, both at work and at home. Jason's professional life was falling apart. His reputation was in tatters, and his once solid standing in the company had crumbled under the weight of the rumors and anonymous tips. He was on the verge of losing everything, but he didn't know it yet. He still believed he could fix it, that if he just worked harder, he could turn things around. And that was exactly where I wanted him. Kate, on the other hand, was falling apart emotionally. She'd been so certain of her future with Jason, so sure that they would ride off into the sunset together, but now she wasn't so sure. I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me, the doubt, the fear. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew something was wrong. She could feel it slipping away, and I reveled in it. I wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot, but the pieces were in place. Jason's life was on the brink of collapse, and Kate was standing on the edge with him, watching everything she'd planned come crashing down. They didn't know I was behind it, and that was the best part. To them, it was just bad luck, bad timing, a series of unfortunate events that were tearing them apart. But I knew better. I was in control. I had the power. And soon, I would make my final move. When the time was right, I'd walk into Jason's office, introduce myself, and watch him tremble. I walked into Jason's office with a calm that didn't match the storm inside me. The receptionist barely glanced up as I passed her, my shoes making soft, deliberate clicks against the polished floor. Jason's office door was half open. I could see him behind his desk, staring at his phone, his face drawn with the weight of everything that had been unraveling around him. I paused outside, my fingers tightening around the handle. This was it. Every step had led me to this moment, and I could feel the tension coiling in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and cold satisfaction. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Jason. He looked up, startled, his expression twisting with confusion as he registered who I was. The recognition hit him like a punch, his face draining of color. He tried to cover it, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the panic lurking just below the surface. I'm sorry, do I know you? His voice was shaky, the confident executive facade crumbling. I shut the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. I didn't say anything for a moment, just let him feel the weight of my presence, the tension growing thick between us. He stood up slowly, like a man cornered by something he didn't quite understand. You know exactly who I am, I said quietly, my voice steady, controlled. I'm Kate's husband. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The air in the room shifted, heavy with unspoken accusations. For a second, I could see his mind racing, scrambling for an explanation, a way out of this. But there wasn't one. He knew it. I knew it. We need to talk, I said, my tone making it clear he didn't have a choice. Jason's shoulders sagged, defeated before he'd even tried to fight. He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, my eyes fixed on him. The tremor in his hands betrayed him as he fumbled to turn off his phone, placing it face down on the desk, a move that felt all too familiar. He leaned back in his chair, trying to regain some semblance of control, but his nerves were written all over him. What? What do you want? His voice was barely more than a whisper, the fear in it palpable. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. That depends on you. I walked slowly around his office, my gaze skimming over the framed certificates on the wall, the photos of him shaking hands with people whose names I didn't care to know. All of it, his carefully constructed life, was hanging by a thread, and I was here to cut it. You're going to listen to me, I said, stopping just behind his chair. He flinched as if he could feel the pressure of my presence without seeing me. And you're going to do exactly as I say. He opened his mouth, probably to stammer out some excuse, some desperate attempt to salvage whatever he thought was left. But I didn't give him the chance. I know everything, I said, my voice flat, about you and Kate. The words landed like a blow. He sagged further into his chair, eyes wide, the last traces of bravado crumbling away. I don't know what you— Stop, I cut him off, stepping closer. I could hear the fear in his breathing now, ragged, uneven. We're past that. There's no point in denying it. I've known for weeks. I've seen you. I've followed you. I've watched you with her. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as if the right words might miraculously save him. But there were no right words, not for this. You've already started to feel it, haven't you? I leaned forward, my hands gripping the back of his chair. He was frozen in place, eyes wide, staring straight ahead as if he could avoid my gaze. Your career slipping away, your reputation starting to unravel. It's not an accident, Jason. It's me. I've been pulling the strings. His breath hitched, a soft, pathetic sound that sent a cold thrill through me. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. The truth was sinking in now, heavy and undeniable. I circled back to the front of his desk, standing over him, watching as he tried to process what was happening. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't just some cuckolded husband anymore. I was the man who could destroy everything he'd worked for. You're going to lose everything, I continued, my voice low and even. Your job, your reputation, your future, it's all going to slip away from you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Jason's hands trembled on the desk, his fingers clutching at the edge like he might be able to hold on if he just tried hard enough. But I wasn't finished yet. I leaned forward, my face inches from his. Unless, I said softly, letting the word hang in the air. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting up to meet mine. There it was, the desperation, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still get out of this. It was almost pathetic, almost. Unless you do exactly what I say, I continued. You're going to break things off with Kate. You're going to make her think it's your decision, that you're losing interest. You'll do whatever it takes to push her away, to make her question everything. And in return, I'll let you keep your career. I'll stop the rumors. I'll let you have some semblance of a life. Jason was shaking now, his body practically vibrating with fear, but there was a flicker of relief in his eyes too, a spark of hope that he could still salvage something, that I might actually let him off the hook if he just did what I asked. You understand me? I asked, my voice cold. He nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, I'll do it. I stood up straight, the weight of control settling around me like a second skin. I'd expected this, the way he'd fold. Men like Jason, weak men, men who thrived on the illusion of power, always did. He'd do anything to save himself, and that's what made this so perfect. Good, I said, my tone final. I'll be watching. Don't even think about crossing me. If you do, I'll destroy you. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him sitting there trembling, his life unraveling behind him. Step one of the plan was complete. Jason was now under my control, and it didn't take long to see the results. Within days, I noticed a shift in Kate's behavior. She was on edge, worried, distracted. I could see the doubt creeping in, the fear that Jason was pulling away. She didn't understand why. She couldn't see the puppet strings I'd tied around both of them, pulling tighter with every move. At home, I kept my distance, cold but not accusatory. I didn't need to accuse her anymore. She was doing it to herself. The guilt was eating her alive, and I watched with a sick satisfaction as the woman I once loved slowly unraveled before my eyes. Jason, true to his word, started distancing himself from her. He didn't have a choice. The fear I'd planted in him was too strong. He canceled plans, missed calls, became less attentive, and with every subtle withdrawal, Kate grew more frantic. I could see it in the way she watched her phone, waiting for texts that never came. The way she hesitated before leaving for work meetings, as if she wasn't even sure they were real anymore. I stayed quiet, watching as the relationship she'd staked her future on crumbled beneath her. She tried to reach out to Jason, tried to hold on, but he was slipping through her fingers, just like she'd let me slip through hers. One night, after yet another silent dinner, Kate finally broke. She came to me, her face pale, her hands trembling. I think something's wrong, she whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. With Jason. I looked at her, feigning confusion. What do you mean? Her voice cracked as she spoke. He's distant. I don't understand. Everything was fine, but now, I don't know. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. She was terrified of losing him, of losing the future she thought she had with him. And I could see the cracks in her armor, the same cracks I'd spent weeks carving into her perfect little world. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her with a cold detachment. Maybe he's just busy. Work stress, right? Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Jason's career had been falling apart thanks to me, and now she was questioning everything. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. As the days passed, the distance between them grew wider. Kate tried to hold on, but Jason was slipping, just as I'd planned, and I watched it all unfold, the cold satisfaction of my revenge settling deeper into my bones. Soon, the cracks would become too deep, too wide. Their relationship would shatter. And I'd be there to watch it all fall apart. Jason's downfall came faster than even I expected. Once the cracks in his professional life started showing, the whole facade collapsed. I watched, detached, as the pieces of his carefully constructed world fell apart, one after another. It began with the deal I'd sabotaged, the one that was supposed to be his saving grace. His company had banked on him to secure a major contract with a high-profile client. I'd whispered enough doubts into the right ears, raised just enough red flags that the client pulled out at the last minute. Jason tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a temporary setback, but the damage was done. His bosses, already weary from the rumors swirling around his behavior, lost faith in him. They demoted him first, quietly, stripping him of his authority. But when he couldn't claw back from that, they let him go, fired, just like that. I kept track of it all from a distance, monitoring the emails, the texts. Kate didn't mention it right away. At first, she tried to keep up appearances, believing that Jason's silence was just another hiccup. But then she found out. She didn't come to me. She never did when it was something real. Instead, I heard her sobbing quietly in the bathroom one night, her phone clutched in her hand. Jason had texted her. Just a few cold words. It's over. Don't call me again. I could have pitied her in that moment, but I didn't. I felt nothing. Jason was done. He'd left the city, probably fled somewhere to lick his wounds, too ashamed to face the wreckage of his life. I imagined him sitting alone in some dingy apartment, the weight of his failures pressing down on him. He'd lost everything, his job, his reputation, and now Kate. I didn't need to track him anymore. He was irrelevant, broken beyond repair. Kate, though, she was still here. I knew the night she'd finally come to me. I'd been waiting for it. The quiet in our house had grown unbearable in those days after Jason's exit, each passing moment thick with the tension of words unsaid, of truths she didn't know I already knew. She'd been avoiding me, staying late at work, genuinely this time, I assumed, coming home with tired eyes and a forced smile. But tonight, I knew, would be different. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and hesitant. I didn't turn around when she entered the room. I could feel her there, standing behind me, hovering like she wasn't sure how to begin. "I need to talk to you," she finally said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of the air between us hang before turning slowly to face her. She looked like a ghost of the woman I once knew, pale, drained, her eyes hollow from nights of restless sleep. Her hands twisted together nervously, her wedding ring catching the dim light. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I, I've been seeing someone," she started, her voice trembling. "Jason." "From work." The name hung between us, sharp and bitter. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but—" She faltered, searching for the right words, maybe hoping there was some version of this where she didn't sound as pathetic as she felt. "But I fell in love with him." She was trying to meet my eyes, but I kept my gaze steady, hard. I didn't let her see what I was thinking. I wanted her to keep talking, to dig the knife deeper into her own chest. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. And now," her voice broke. "Now he's left me. He ended things. I don't know what to do." There it was, the desperation, the vulnerability, the pathetic need for sympathy, for some kind of absolution. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. Kate took a step back, her eyes wide, waiting for whatever was coming next. "I know," I said finally, my voice cold. Her breath caught. What?" "I know about Jason. I've known for weeks." The shock on her face was almost satisfying. Almost. "But how?" "I've seen you together. I've followed you. I've read your emails, your texts. I know everything." She stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. "You've known all this time?" "Yes." I stepped closer, watching her crumble under the weight of my words. "I know you were planning to leave me. I know you were building a future with him." "I know everything, Kate." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I didn't—" "Stop." The word came out sharp, cutting through her pathetic sobs. "Don't apologize. You don't get to apologize." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was broken, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on her all at once. I should have felt something in that moment. Anger, triumph, maybe even the satisfaction of knowing I'd won. But instead, I felt hollow, cold. "It's over," I said, my voice flat. Kate looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please, we can fix this. I was wrong. I made a mistake, but we can work through it. Please." Her words were desperate, but they were nothing to me. Empty. Meaningless. "No, Kate." I shook my head, the finality of it sinking in. "We're done." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I stood there for a moment, watching her fall apart, feeling the weight of the months of lies, of betrayal, of the man I'd become pressing down on me. I didn't stay long. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there with the pieces of her broken world. Kate moved out a week later. It wasn't dramatic. There were no more pleas, no tearful confrontations. She packed her things in silence, avoiding my eyes, her face hollow and lifeless. The woman I once loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. When she left, the house felt impossibly empty. The silence that followed her departure was heavy, almost suffocating. I found myself sitting in the living room that first night, staring at the blank walls, the memories of our life together swirling around me like ghosts. She was gone. Jason was gone. And I was alone. But it was over. The plan had worked. They'd both lost everything, just as I'd wanted. Kate had no future with Jason, and Jason had no future at all. The life they thought they could build on the ashes of my marriage was nothing more than a distant dream, shattered by the very hands they tried to keep clean. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt something. But instead, there was only a hollow space where that feeling should have been. I'd won, but the victory tasted bitter, like ashes. A few days later, I heard from mutual friends that Kate was struggling. She hadn't found a place to stay yet, was bouncing between friends' couches, unsure of what to do next. Jason had disappeared. No one knew where he'd gone, and the whispers about his professional downfall had grown louder. He was ruined. She was lost. And me? I was free. But was I? I sat alone in the quiet of my now empty house, the weight of everything I'd done settling over me like a shroud. I'd destroyed them. I'd taken their futures, their hopes, their dreams, and crushed them under my heel. And yet, here I was, alone with nothing but the echoes of my own choices. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened street, the rain falling softly against the glass. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to the chaos I'd created, to the lives I'd torn apart. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The rage, the anger, the need for revenge, it was all gone. There was nothing left, just the silence. I'd won, but at what cost? As the rain slid down the window pane, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same man who'd set out on this path. I'd become something colder, harder, a shadow of the person I used to be. The revenge was complete. Kate and Jason had paid for their betrayal. But as I stood there staring out into the night, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I sacrificed in the process? What had I lost along the way? The answer didn't come easily. Maybe it never would. I turned away from the window, letting the darkness swallow me whole. I'd won, but at what cost? The house was empty. It had been days since Kate had moved out, but the echoes of her presence still lingered in the air, faint, like the scent of her perfume that still clung to the curtains. I hadn't bothered changing anything. Her things were gone, but her absence had a way of filling the space even more than she ever did when she was here. I thought the quiet would bring me peace. I thought I'd feel something, a release maybe, a sense of freedom from the weight of the last few months. But the silence was oppressive, closing in on me from every corner. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the cold fireplace, the empty walls. The rain outside pattered gently against the windows, a dull, rhythmic sound that mirrored the hollow beating of my own heart. I'd won. Everything I set out to do, I'd accomplished. Kate was gone, Jason was ruined, and the life they thought they could build together was nothing more than dust. I should have felt victorious. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? I stood up, restless, the quiet getting under my skin like an itch I couldn't scratch. The weight of the revenge, the carefully laid out plan, it had all consumed me for so long that I couldn't remember what life was like before it. Each step, each calculated move had been a part of my daily existence. Without it, without the anger driving me, what was left? I paced the length of the living room, my thoughts circling like vultures over a carcass. Kate was staying with friends, or at least that's what I'd heard. She'd always been good at playing the victim, so it didn't surprise me that she'd found people willing to take her in. I imagined her explaining it all away, twisting the story so that she came out looking like the wounded party. That was how she operated. But I knew the truth. I had watched her fall apart. I had made sure of it. Jason, on the other hand, had disappeared completely. No one had seen him since he lost his job. A few colleagues had mentioned he'd left the city, but no one knew where he'd gone. In my mind, I pictured him sitting in some dingy motel room, staring at the mess he'd made of his life, cursing the day he ever met Kate. The image should have brought me satisfaction, but all I felt was an empty, gnawing sense of nothing. I wandered into the kitchen, opening the fridge out of habit, though I wasn't hungry. The cold light spilled out over the empty shelves. I hadn't bothered to restock since Kate left. The thought of grocery shopping seemed too mundane, too normal for the state of my mind. I closed the fridge and leaned against the counter, feeling the cool marble beneath my palms. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted in me, something deeper than just the end of my marriage or the success of my revenge. I was different now, colder, harder, less tethered to the world around me. What had started as a plan to take back control, to make Kate and Jason feel the same helplessness, had left me, unmoored, hollow? The rain intensified, tapping harder against the windows, as if trying to wake me from the stupor that had settled over my life. I walked to the window, watching the drops slide down the glass, blurring the view of the street outside. Cars passed by, headlights slicing through the rain, and people moved on with their lives, unaware of the storm that had raged within me these past few months. Life kept moving, and yet I felt frozen in place. I'd gotten what I wanted, hadn't I? But as I stood there staring at the rain-soaked world outside, I realized that I hadn't planned for this part. The aftermath, the quiet, the emptiness that followed. My entire life had been focused on the act of revenge, of making them pay. I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. What happened when the dust settled and there was nothing left to fight for? I turned away from the window, the weight of my own reflection in the glass too much to bear. I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. The anger that had once fueled me was gone, leaving behind something darker, something I couldn't name. Was this what I had become? A man who had sacrificed everything only to find himself standing in the ruins of a life he no longer recognized? I sat back down, running my hands through my hair, trying to shake off the feeling creeping up my spine. The victory I had envisioned had been a lie. The satisfaction I thought I would feel had slipped through my fingers, as intangible as smoke. All I had left was the emptiness. Days passed in much the same way. The quiet house, the rain, the silence. I'd go through the motions of living, showering, making coffee, sitting at my desk pretending to work, but it all felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Even the memories of Kate and Jason felt like they belonged to another person, a version of myself that no longer existed. Mutual friends reached out, awkward attempts to check in, but I deflected their questions. What could I tell them? That I'd won? That my marriage was over, and I'd orchestrated the destruction of two lives? No one would understand the cold satisfaction that had driven me, the need to make them suffer like I had suffered. But even that satisfaction was fleeting. Now all I had was a hollow victory, one that came at a cost I wasn't sure I fully understood yet. I spent hours thinking about the man I used to be, the man who was content, who loved his wife, who believed in the life they'd built together. That man was gone, destroyed the moment I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't go back to him, even if I wanted to. He died the night I saw Kate with Jason, and in his place there was only me. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets outside slick and shining under the faint glow of the streetlights. I walked back to the window, watching as the world outside returned to normal. The storm was over. Everything looked the same as it always did, but I knew better. Everything had changed. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I'd done, the lives I'd shattered, not just theirs, but my own. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect of my own ruin, and as much as I had wanted them to pay, I hadn't considered the cost to myself. Revenge had consumed me, twisted me into something I barely recognized. I turned away from the window, feeling the heaviness settle deeper into my chest. I had won, but the victory tasted bitter, like ash in my mouth. The life I'd once had, the man I used to be, they were gone, and no amount of revenge could bring them back. The house was quiet again, the rain long gone, but inside, the storm still raged. I walked through the darkened rooms, the memories of what once was flickering like ghosts at the edges of my mind. I had lost them. Kate, Jason, my old self. They were all gone, and I was the only one left standing, alone. I stood in the center of the empty living room, staring at the blank walls, the echoes of my choices swirling around me like the wind that had driven the rain. I had torn everything apart, and now I had to live with the consequences. The silence was deafening. I walked back to the window, staring out at the empty street, the world moving on without me. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, heavier than I had expected. I had won, but the cost was more than I could have ever imagined. The rain began again, soft at first, tapping gently against the window pane. I watched it for a long time, lost in the rhythm, lost in the emptiness that filled the spaces between each drop. I had won, but at what cost?